Throughout its long history, the Resident Evil franchise has terrified players with all manner of freaks and monstrosities, but it's hard to think of a single enemy type that has left as much of a mark on the series as the bioweapons known as Tyrants. The T-002 served as the final boss in the very first Resident Evil, and since then, many other kinds of Tyrants have made appearances in multiple installments. Soon, history will repeat itself as Nemesis chases us across Raccoon City once again when Resident Evil 3 launches not long from now. Here, in this feature, we'll be ranking all of the Tyrants that have appeared in Resident Evil games over the years, from worst to best. Number 13. T-091. Appearances: Resident Evil Dead Aim. When the series' lore itself tells you that the T-091 was more or less a failure, you can't help but agree. Created by Umbrella through an experiment that saw them make a tyrant with both the T-virus and the G-virus, the T-091 turned out to not be at all what they were expecting. It did not produce a bioelectrical current, which they wanted it to, and its heart stuck out of its back, which made it much more vulnerable than any other tyrant model. It did, however, have tentacles instead of claws, which sort of set itself apart in an interesting way. Anyways, given the fact that Dead Aim was a light gun shooter, battles against the T-091 weren't all that challenging, especially given the fact that it had a pretty obvious weak point. Number 12. HYPNOS-T type. Appearances: Resident Evil Survivor. The HYPNOS-T type serves as the biggest threat players have to come up against in Resident Evil Survivor, and it's surely got an interesting story. On top of being a tyrant, the HYPNOS-T type also has the HYPNOS gene, which continues to kill weaker cells in the tyrant and continuously propagates stronger cells, making it far more powerful than a regular tyrant. Similar to the T-091, given the game's nature as a light gun shooter, the HYPNOS-T type doesn't pose too much of a threat, and perhaps because of the underwhelming quality of the game itself, doesn't make too much of an impact either. Number 11. T-078. Appearances: Resident Evil Code Veronica and Resident Evil The Dark Side Chronicles. The T-078 is one of the most underwhelming tyrants we've ever fought in a Resident Evil game. The first fight is incredibly brief, and just sees the tyrant walking toward you while you fire at it with everything you've got to bring it down. If you've stocked up on rounds for your grenade launcher, the fight is a cakewalk. The second fight in the plane is a bit more challenging, with the T-078's lunging attacks being much more threatening and taking a lot more damage to go down, but this isn't a very long or tough encounter when all is said and done either. Number 10. T-001. Appearances: Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil The Umbrella Chronicles. The T-091 wasn't the only tyrant that Umbrella deemed a failed experiment. The very first tyrant ever, T-001, was also considered a failed experiment, though it would go on to serve as the foundation on which all other following tyrants were made. With an exposed heart that didn't require too much damage to take it down, and an involuntary twitch due to its issues with its nervous system, the T-001 wasn't a very capable tyrant either. That said, throughout Resident Evil 0, it does show up time and time again to pose some danger to the likes of Rebecca, Billy, and later, even Albert Wesker, so it does get some points for having at least some presence. Number 9. Tyrant C. Appearances: Resident Evil Outbreak File Number 2. Tyrant C may not have too much weird stuff going for it, but it does nail all of the fundamentals tyrants usually need pretty well. It's strong, fast, and can do a deadly amount of damage, and it can eventually turn into a super tyrant as well. It's also got an attack up its sleeve that means instant death for the player, while with its menacing horns and hulking stature, it also looks quite imposing. Number 8. Ivan. Appearances: Resident Evil The Umbrella Chronicles. The T-103 Ivan tyrants are perhaps among the most unique tyrant-type enemies we've seen in Resident Evil, not least because of their appearance. With their visors and more human appearances, they don't look quite as instantly frightening. That said, they do have a lot of the same capabilities that a regular T-103 usually does, and are also supposed to have greater powers of comprehension. Number 7. Thanatos. Appearances: Resident Evil Outbreak. Thanatos serves as the main threat, so to speak, in Outbreak's 5th and final chapter, and does justice to that tyrant tag. From an instant kill attack to having its exposed heart covered by a metal casing to being extremely durable, Thanatos is no pushover, while its Super Tyrant form is also pretty fearsome. It does have a couple weaknesses though, such as a weakness to electric jolts, so it's perhaps marginally weaker than many other Tyrants. Number 6. Tyrant R. Appearances: Resident Evil Outbreak File Number 2. Though the Tyrant R is on paper less powerful than the Tyrant C, who was supposed to be one of the most powerful Tyrant models designed by Umbrella at the time, the presence that it has in Resident Evil Outbreak File Number 2 helps it leave a bigger mark. From going rogue to undergoing the Tyrant Reborn transformation, which gave it giant claws like a Super Tyrant, but also gave him incredible speed, to being absorbed by Nyx and somehow still managing to survive, only finally being killed by Ada Wong later, the Tyrant R was one durable bad dude. Number 5. T-002. Appearances: Resident Evil, Resident Evil 2002, and Resident Evil: The Umbrella Chronicles. The first true Tyrant, the first one that Umbrella deemed a success and paved the way for all others. The T-002 did not have any fancy armor or any unique abilities. It was a regular, hulking tyrant, one that could take a lot of punishment, deal a ton of damage, and posed an imposing threat. The actual boss fight against the T-002 isn't the most difficult, and many other tyrants that followed outdid it in many more ways than one, but simply because of its lasting impact and legacy, we have to place the T-002 high on our list. Number 4. Bandersnatch. Appearances: Resident Evil Code Veronica and Resident Evil: The Dark Side Chronicles. The Bandersnatch deserves a ton of points simply for its unique and horrifying appearance. All fleshy and rotten, the Bandersnatch was an experimental, more cost-effective tyrant for Umbrella, and it was an absolute monstrosity. Its movements were slower, and it took damage from most weapons, but it could also absorb a lot of damage, while its enlarged, engorged arm gave it incredible range with its attacks, and even allowed it to quickly pull itself across large distances. Number 3. T.A.L.O.S. Appearances: Resident Evil: The Umbrella Chronicles. T.A.L.O.S deserves a lot of props for multiple reasons. For starters, it just looks super cool. It wears a thick armor that renders it almost invincible to most weapons. It has a massive left arm that can do deadly amounts of damage. It is equipped with a weapon that can shoot freaking homing rockets, and it's got a chip implant that gives it frightening mobility. Its second form is quite different, but still very threatening, relying much more on furious physical attacks. The fight against T.A.L.O.S in the Umbrella Chronicles is also no cakewalk either. Number 2. T-00. Appearances: Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil: The Dark Side Chronicles, and Resident Evil 2 2019. Better known as Mr. X, the T-00 is one of the most iconic and popular Resident Evil enemies. First appearing in the original Resident Evil 2, this menacing monstrosity was already a pretty imposing presence as it is, bursting through walls, stalking the players, and dealing deadly blows. But with 2019's remake of the classic horror title, he returned as an even more terrifying threat. Mr. X was unrelenting. The sounds of his footsteps could induce nightmares, and he injected a healthy dose of tension into an already scary game. He had a constant presence throughout the game, not just in terms of gameplay, but the story as well. He is, without a doubt, one of the best Resident Evil enemies ever. But there is one tyrant that even Mr. X can't stand up to. Number 1. Nemesis. Appearances: Resident Evil 3, Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica, Resident Evil: The Umbrella Chronicles, Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City, and Resident Evil 3 2020. Nemesis. What can we say about this tyrant that many others haven't already said a million times? Though Nemesis is smaller in stature than your regular tyrant, it is much more mobile, durable, and dangerous. Throughout Resident Evil 3, Nemesis is a constant and overbearing presence, and every fight encounter against it brings paralyzing fear. Hell, it's even equipped with a rocket launcher, and it's surely not afraid to use it. Here's hoping that the upcoming Resident Evil 3 remake makes as much of an improvement to Nemesis as Resident Evil 2 did with Mr. X. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from Gaming Bolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.